Welcome back to this retrospective slash review for Privateer 2, The Darkening. And what I want to do is I'm just going to let the opening cutscenes play in the background while we get going here, basically. And just kind of give you my thoughts on this game that I actually spent quite a bit of time playing. And yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and jump into it. So basically, when it comes to this game, there are two comparisons that will probably be made. The first would be to the original Privateer, and the second would be to the other games that had the similar engine. I'd call them your midlife Wing Commander games, basically. So Wing Commander 3, Wing Commander 4, and I think technically Armada was using the same engine, but I didn't play that one, and I'm not really sure how popular, if it was very popular at all, as being a spin-off game. And from what I could tell looking at it, it didn't have much of a story, so I wasn't really truly interested in it. Maybe that's my loss. Who knows? But basically, that's the two main comparisons that you would make to this game. And I will say that when you compare it to the original Privateer, there's a lot of things that are very similar. The very open-ended nature of the game, it's in this one as well, and that's a very good thing. I do like how open-ended it is. Some people may think it's a bit odd to not have your own cargo ship like you did in the original Privateer, and you have to hire a cargo ship and you basically transport them. Honestly, I kind of like the having an escort cargo ship in this game a little bit better, mostly because they're great wingmen. And if you get the right ones that have two or three, cannons or turrets, excuse me, that's about the correct terminology, they can actually very much help you out through quite a bit of the game. So it's actually a very good feature, in my opinion, having those escorting around those cargo ships. Now, I will say that this game, when you compare it to Wing Commander 3 and 4, it's probably my favorite of those games, to be fair. It doesn't have the insane difficulty that Wing Commander 4 has. And, Wing Commander 3, trying to think back on it, you were able to adjust the difficulty of the game. So in that regards, I think this game may be on the same scale as Wing Commander 3 difficulty-wise. There were a handful of missions that I did that were pretty rough, to say the least. And but I was able to get through them. And I was able to get through them without turning invulnerability on, which is something that with Wing Commander 4, there are so many times I had to turn invulnerability on due to the absolute insanity of how difficult that game was. So definitely compared to Wing Commander 4, I think this game is far more fair in difficulty. And a lot of it just really comes down to what type of ship you're using. And personally, I prefer to use ones that have more shields and armor. I found the ones that had good shields but weak armor, it didn't take long to get through the shields. So maybe having armor was probably the better thing. And that last ship I had was just amazing. I liked it. It was great. Once I got that ship, it was pretty much game over for everybody, pretty much. And there were a couple of times I got jumped, and I got taken out even in that ship, but it's very few. But when it does come to the difficulty, one of the things about this game that is a negative is the fact that those random spawns, especially early on in the game, could really make or break you. There were times I would just hit a nav point and they would just keep spawning enemy after enemy after enemy. I'm like, oh, come on, now this is getting a little ridiculous. So from that perspective, this is definitely something I think the original Privateer did better on. Because once you would hit a nav point in the original Privateer, if there were pirates there and you took care of them, that was it. Uh, Whereas this one, it could literally just keep spawning pirates depending on how unlucky you got with the RNG, and and that happens quite a bit in this game. Another thing about the game is the sliding difficulty, which is very unique, but not necessarily unique in a good way. Because if you go around and you kill too many enemies, that's going to boost up the difficulty of the game very quickly to the point where you may not be able to handle everything, which is another reason why when it came to making money, I did a lot of cargo runs because I would let the cargo ship take out enemies. I could actually try to get them down, damage them very close to death, and then I'd let the cargo ship finish them off. So that was a very good aspect. But it's also, like I said, you have to be careful because you get too much money, too much kills, or even get too far into the main storyline, you can get overwhelmed very quickly. That's a bit of a difference from Wing Commander 3 and 4, whereas basically you could actually adjust the difficulty in the options menu. And once again, with the original Privateer, if you look at that one, it wasn't so difficult unless got to certain, sectors of the space, basically, or very far along on the main storyline mission. Speaking of that, this game is very, very similar to Privateer in the fact that they're both, when you think about the main story, they're both very linear. There's not a lot of branching paths like you have in the other Wing Commander games, basically. The main storyline is linear, but I guess the open-ended nature of the games themselves are what really give it its value as far as a playthrough is concerned. The story in this one, I don't know. It's decent. I don't think it's bad, but I mean, at the same time, it's not like the greatest storyline ever. And also, when you compare it to the original Privateer, there's a lot of factions in this game, a lot more factions, especially pirate factions, and they're not detailed pretty much at all, really. The only difference between them is what types of ships they use. You don't really know their motivations. And in fact, like a lot of the factions in this game, there's no way to, at least no way that I could tell, there's no way to increase your standing with them. Now, in the original Privateer, you couldn't really get the Kilrathi or the Fanatics on your side, but they were definitely unique and you knew where they stood. I mean, well, the Kilrathi being the Kilrathi, of course, but the Fanatics actually had, especially in the Righteous Fire expansion pack, some story behind them. There was some explanation for what they were doing, and you were actually sitting there trying to thwart them. In this, like I said, there's just so many different factions, and they're just there to be targets to be blown up in space. The only one that really gets any, details the Kindred, and that's fairly minor, to be honest with you, up until the very end of the main storyline. Other than that, like I say, it's an okay story. It's not bad. I do wish that this game, and maybe in Wing Commander 3, they had done something to improve the visuals of the cinematics. Because as you can tell here, the cinematics, I'm using a community patch to improve the cinematics, but they're still extremely grainy and low resolution. Whereas in Wing Commander 4, they gave you the DVD quality cinematics, and so it looks so much better than this game or Wing Commander 3. And I just kind of wish that they had done something to improve the visuals in this game. At least for the movies, I should say. The actual game itself, I thought looked really good. Um, which I pretty much I think said for all the middle engine games. I enjoyed them. The variety of ships. There's a lot of variety in the ships, so it's great there. The gameplay for this game very much more focused on using guns, which does suit my playstyle. To be fair, um, it I actually had a lot of fun playing this game for the most part. Like I said, there's only a handful of times I really got a little frustrated, but I was still able to push through in the end and beat everything. So yeah, I am nitpicking certain things here and there, but at the end of the day, I think that it's a good game. It's definitely a good game. I don't know if I would say it's as good as the original Privateer, but definitely as far as the middle engine games, or I guess what they call it, real engine. I forget the name of the engine. It's definitely my favorite of them for sure. I think what else can I mention here? What other shortcomings, if any, can I think of? Yeah, I think just basically early on that the biggest difficulty you're going to have is the fact that the early ships are just so weak and very easy to get blown up. Uh, the side missions, I almost forgot about it. I need to talk about the side missions. First of all, I think that the bulletin board and SOS missions, their degree of difficulty varied widely. And so those types of missions are comparable to a lot of the side missions you could have done in the original Privateer. Um, I didn't do a lot of them, and there's a ton. I think they said there's like over 100, but they're all completely and totally randomly generated. For the most part, especially early on, well, that's kind of cool. I never saw this before. Anyway, um, early on, basically, I did a lot of cargo runs because I could manage the amount of kills I got in the game a little bit better that way. And so I feel that that was the best way to go about making money, just a rather bit slow. This game, at least on GOG, they give you a lot of good guides to come with it. Mostly I just use the reference guide and the actual official guide, especially just looking at where could I go to deliver things and make the most money. And that's how I went through the vast majority of the game, really. And so the bulletin board missions and SOS missions will be comparable to the side missions you could do in Privateer, whereas they're completely random and just ways of making extra money. I don't know if I like them more in this game. In fact, until I really got my good ship, it was almost suicidal to do them, to be fair. Even the very cheap ones where you only got like 3,000 credits as a reward. So I try to avoid most of those. The one thing that is both a benefit and a negative in this game are the cinematic side missions, which these are things that you never got in the original Privateer. Is an actual side mission that had some, story to it, and they're really neat, but they're completely and totally random and dependent on which CD you have in the drive at the time, and and they can actually pop up at very inopportune times. Like some of them, like especially like the Lord Vox mission, for instance. That one, if you don't do it immediately, you can't do it, and so it's just kind of annoying that way. I guess I'll hit new again. Okay, cool, interesting. Um, so from that perspective, they can be neat because of the cinematics, but at the same time, they can very much inconvenience you, or they may just not pop. I mean, it took me an extremely long time to get the last few cinematic missions in the game. They just would not come up. And even when I went into the cd.dat file and I changed the CD, you think, okay, that'll help out, right? Kinda, but not exactly. I mean, that last one, it was the easiest cinematic mission next to maybe the Uncle Kashmai one. It was so easy, but I just could never get it to come up for me because it was completely and totally random. And eventually, like when I was almost at my wits' end, saying, "Okay, I throw up my hands on this one," it finally appeared in the in my data pad. So from that perspective, I'm not a big fan of how some of the side missions can either inconvenience you or they can just never show up and you might not ever get them. So from that perspective, not a big fan of that port of that aspect of this cinematic side missions, but I do appreciate cinematic side missions for being what they are, extra story for the game. Having said that, like the what was that one? The guy with the cowboy hat, basically. That particular cinematic side mission, if you happen to not get lucky and get that one relatively early on, you miss out. Or if you not only don't get it, but you don't complete it, uh, you miss out on the best gun in the game because the Craven Mark IV is just hands down the best weapon in the game. Now, the mass ion cannon is a decent gun, but it doesn't compare to the Craven. So it could definitely, once again, the random nature of getting those cinematic missions, it could make the game much more difficult on you if you don't get it or if you fail. The other one, like the Louisa Phillips, she was supposed to accompany me on 3 of my missions flying around, and she never did. So they're kind of buggy as well to a certain extent. Um, Other than that, let me think. Is there anything else I can think of with this game? Nah, that's pretty much it. It's a great game. Like I said, probably my favorite of the middle engine games. I'd probably put it just a little bit ahead of Wing Commander 3 and definitely ahead of Wing Commander 4 because I mean Wing Commander 4 was good, but just insane difficulty really killed my enjoyment of that game. This one was much more fun, if a little bit drawn out because of having to do the cargo runs to actually make money and upgrade my ship. But that whole rush of getting your ship upgraded and getting to customize it is much more fun than say in the Wing Commander games where you have your set ship that you can get and this is all you have to work with. So I definitely love that aspect. I don't think I would rate this as highly as I did the original Privateer, which is still just an amazingly good game. But this is definitely a great game. I think it's definitely worth trying. I use the community patch that I found at the Wing Commander Combat Information Center, and I'll go ahead and link that here in the description to this video as well. Um, it I'm not sure if you could get it working under Linux with a community patch because basically you have to run this in either Windows 95 or Windows 98 mode. But when I did that, and with administrator rights, when I did that, it worked really well and was pretty stable. I mean, I did have, you know, probably enough crashes I could probably count them on both hands, but I wouldn't say it crashed on a regular basis. So I wouldn't call it stable per se, but I wouldn't really call it unstable either. So it could be worse. It could be far worse, actually. So it's relatively stable. Just make sure you save your game constantly. Definitely worth playing. And I'd say, I don't know, I'd probably say about 85%, about the same score I gave Wing Commander 3 roughly. Um, Definitely a good game. Has some rough edges for sure. A lot of loose ends with the undetailed factions in the game that you don't really know about other than their targets to be blown up. But other than that, definitely a great game and worth your time if you enjoy space simulators or just interested in the Wing Commander um, series in general. So as far as Wing Commander is concerned, I've only got one more game really that I want to try out, and we'll see how that one goes. But until then, that's my thoughts on Privateer 2, The Darkening, and I want to thank you all for watching this video. Take care.